your Cache Creek regular council meeting on October 26, 2020 to order. And the first order of business is delegation from the Cache Creek Fire Department, Damien Couture, First Assistant Chief. And we welcome you to the council chambers and look forward to your presentation, Damien.
Thank you. So I wanted to come in tonight at the request of Tom and some other firemen to demonstrate the use of our SCBA's. There is a proposal and discussion regarding the purchase of new SCBA's, and part of why I wanted to come in is to show you how the equipment works, and then secondly, give you kind of a Q&A as to why we need new equipment. So to start, this is what our current packs look like. This specific unit was manufactured in 2001. We purchased them in Cache Creek in 2015. We purchased them refurbished because there was constraints, and SCBA's are very expensive based on the nature of what they do. These ones and the ones that we are looking at have carbon fiber tanks. There's carbon fiber and steel. The difference in weight is quite considerable. We've been using carbon fiber tanks now for 10 years exclusively. So with the tanks, they go on like a backpack. They get tangled up all the time. That's not uncommon. It's actually easier in just a t-shirt than it is in turnout gear. And then the first step, cinching it up. There we go. Attaching the belt. Some of our units have a double strap, so a strap on each side, similar to the shoulder. This one is one of the few that only has a single one, so it actually doesn't get quite as good of a fit as some of the others. Then, now that we have the tank in place, this is the mask that we currently use. All of our masks are the same. They have a heads-up display that connects wirelessly to your backpack. The intent is so that without it, if you're in a smoke-filled environment, you have the opportunity, you typically can't see even this far away from you. So there is a display here, but there is also one internally within the mask so that we can see a percentage. It has little lights to indicate 25, 50, 75, and 100%. And the mask goes on over the face. How can everybody hear me? Okay. Used it quite a bit. I've kind of learned how to talk through it. You have to basically yell into it. If you're talking normally, nobody will hear you. So that sound is my air tank pressurizing the harness. So now I have air going to my regulator. And I can see that on my gauge here. This unit specifically, it has a backup gauge and a primary digital gauge, which has failed. This unit is actually out of service, that's why it's here tonight, and not on our truck. But it still functions in an emergency, but it doesn't meet any of the standards because the primary systems aren't working anymore. And now I'm on air. So if you're in a hurry and turnout gear and you've done it a lot, it does go on pretty fast. There's also a little clip that goes across the center, but for demonstration purposes, I don't feel that it's necessary. But yeah, like these units were very good units for a long time. In current firefighting scenarios, where they don't really work is they don't have the lifespan as some of the newer tanks, and I'll go into that in a second. So it comes off pretty readily. Some of them have a sticky valve here, so when you pull it off your face, and then all your air is going away. So you don't want that. I'll take it all off. Not for the claustrophobic. Oh, I'm using my outside voice, I'll tone it down. Yeah. So they are a pretty complex system, and they have to be. There's a lot of little safeties involved. I didn't go through all the bells and stuff like that that the system will do for low air alarms and that sort of thing. But the big thing comparing these to current standards, the NFPA recently updated their standards in 2013. And this unit specifically does not meet the current new standards. One of them is a standard retaining to all of the alarms on the system. These ones are set for 25%. So when you're at 25% air, that's when you'll start hearing the alarms. These have an electronic pass alarm. That's a component on this that's failed. That's why it's not safe for use. But when the air reaches 25% capacity, then it'll start sounding an alarm to tell the firefighter, hey, if you're in a building, get out now. You don't have much time. You only have 25% of your air. If you're just out on the fire ground, it tells you, hey, take that moment to get out of the duty that you're doing so that you can go get another tank. Depending on the person, the length of time that a tank lasts really varies. These are what is considered an industry standard of about 30 minutes for the people that are professional firefighters. Most of our members last 20 to 25 minutes on an air tank, roughly. So you can see how we can burn through these really fast. And they take about that much time to fill on an individual. If you have, like, say 10 of them in a queue, one person dedicated to filling them, they take about 20 minutes to fill. In a safe way, you can fill them really quickly, but then just the nature of filling air tanks, it creates heat through the process because you're pushing air through very small lines. High pressure air in through very small lines, so it generates heat. So the air inside the tank is warmer, and you don't get as much in a tank, because then after it cools down, the tank, like say these tanks fill to 2,216 psi, and if you fill them really quickly in say like 5 minutes instead, you'll notice that you're only actually getting like 1,500 psi, 1,700 psi. Like, it's a pretty significant drop, and that just has to do with the science behind air traveling through lines. The new standard is that tanks and equipment will sound off at 33%, so a third of a tank rather than a quarter of a tank, because that oftentimes a firefighter will get into a situation where 25% isn't enough time to disengage and get back to a safe space to be able to take this off. So that's a pretty big one for us, because that alone will impact our ability to do stuff. Like, if we used these current tanks, the 30-minute tanks, it makes a pretty significant difference when we go through tanks faster than the professional firefighter, and all that. 25% isn't a lot of time to stop what you're doing, especially if you're in a building. The new units that we're looking at, the tanks are 45-minute tanks. The tank itself is about the same size. I think it's a little bit bigger, but it's not drastic change. Yeah, it's a 45-minute tank, so you get considerably more use out of it. And I believe Tom's proposal had, we were hoping to get 2 tanks for every unit. 4 tanks for every unit? Okay, so that's more. Yeah, I didn't see his latest one.
Just 2 tanks per unit.
No, 4.
4 units with 2 tanks per unit.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, 4 units, 8 tanks total.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that gives a firefighter an expected 45-minute turnaround on each tank. And realistically, with us anyways, with our 30-minute tanks, every time that you finish a tank, you're checking in with the incident command to make sure that you're okay to be putting another tank on anyways. So going from a 30 to a 45 shouldn't make a huge difference as far as procedures. But a big thing is the safety behind it. We want to make sure that our guys are safe. The other thing is these units here, given their age, they all have components that are starting to fail. This one has an internal pass alarm. Some of them have external ones, but this one, they're internal, they're attached to the system. This one specifically can't go back into service and we can't get parts for. So as of right now, we can never effectively use this piece of equipment. Even though functionally it works, it does its job, it's just it can't keep people safe anymore. Another pretty big component that we have asked of council is for masks. Currently, the way that the system is, we have 8 SCBAs and 8 masks to go with it. Some people that have like an oversized or an undersized mask have one-offs, but that I think is only 2 members in the department. The other 13 members share 8 masks, and these are exceptionally difficult to clean. All the little nooks and crannies and that sort of thing. When you're looking at potential, especially with COVID-19 being a pretty prevalent part in all of our lives right now, cleanliness and sanitation is a major concern that we've had for a long time. And lately, I know it's been the topic of conversation by some members. They don't want to practice with masks just because we have to share it. Like, sure, we're all in a fire, it's one thing, but it's another thing. Like, should I put myself at risk for putting a mask on to train with this piece of equipment that will put me at risk, even though we clean it to the best of our ability? There's so many, it's not like it's a single flat surface. There's so many points and you're breathing and getting droplets directly into it. If you're gonna pass along something, it'll be through something like this. Also part of the proposal was individual masks for members going forward. I feel that COVID-19 was a bit of a wake-up call. We'd always had it kind of on the back burner, but this is kind of a bigger thing. People have always wanted it, but we knew that budgeting is difficult. But especially right now, it's starting to affect the practice capabilities of us, because these are pieces of equipment that you have to use regularly, practice with. If you use it once a year and you have to go and jump into a scenario and use it, it's not a good thing. So people opting to not practice with our equipment is a scary thought, because it could put other firefighters at risk. And we always have to have a certain amount of firefighters on the ground with these pieces of PPE. Specifically, our rules dictate, and these are put forth by the not Cache Creek Fire Department, these are by the Fire Chiefs Association. The rules for BC say that 2 members, if 2 people are attacking with a team on SCBA and they're planning to do something, you have to have 1 person with an SCBA on to be their rescue for the first 5 minutes. Then after 5 minutes, you have to have another pair of people, not just the 1 person. So if you initially get to a scene and there's 3 people in a tank, you're fine, you're good to go. But then within 5 minutes of that, you have to have a 4th person. So there has to be a full team to bail out the first team, and so on and so forth. So that's why initially in our proposal, we're asking for 4 new SCBAs this year. Most of another large component is the tanks. They have expiry dates. They vary based on the composition of the tank, be it steel, be it carbon fiber. We have to send them for testing every so often and that sort of thing. All of the tanks that we have in service are expiring between the start of next year and 2 years from now. So now seemed like a good time to roll out, because with the new system, they wouldn't be able to utilize these tanks. So it just timing wise, we're gonna have to get new tanks anyways. So might as well get tanks and equipment that are going to kind of give us a little bit more of an edge. The units that we were specifically looking at are the Scott X3. It's a good unit. When I did firefit training, and firefit and Kamloops, they're the ones that we used for firefit. They had a really high-end narrow tank that was ultra high pressure. We wouldn't have the same tank, but it's the same backpack. They contain a lot of components that are just better than what we have. They use a lot of new materials. These units are actually really prone to rust and oxidization. This unit is one of the better ones, but a lot of the little fittings are starting to get coated in rust. We have some units that are really bad. This is one of the nicer ones. But even like on the handle here, you can see how this is supposed to be a chrome finish and it is not. So that could compromise the device if it went to an inspection. But the new units are made out of better materials, as well as they have a lot of other new safety features that just make things simpler to do. They have connections to be able to do buddy breathing, which is a new requirement. So say in the event that something was to happen, we had a team of 2 people inside of a building and we had to send somebody in to save them. Those tanks are able to connect to each other, those systems. You can connect one air tank off the person rescuing to the person that's on the ground. And there's also optional equipment which we haven't looked at or put into the proposal for a buddy breathing mask. And so the way that that works is if you are performing life rescue inside of a building, you connect this special hose, it goes into a little bag that the initial rescue team, not firemen rescuing another firefighter, a fireman rescuing a person inside of a burning building. You have a little bag, you know you're going into a building with a person, you go in, you connect this to the bottom of your SCBA, and you have a little mask and you put it over their head and take them out. So that they are breathing safe air while you're removing them from the environment. We haven't put that in anything yet, but that is an option that could be purchased later if it was deemed necessary. Whereas these units, that you can't even get parts for it, let alone accessories. And there's also, as far as accountability goes, there's options for remote viewing. That's a really advanced option, but they're a pretty impressive piece of equipment, and they're the industry standard. And the other nice thing that would be great, we do a lot of mutual aid with Ashcroft, and all of the equipment that we're looking at would be cross-compatible with Ashcroft. So if we're ever in a scenario where both departments are working together on a scene, if they run out of air or we run out of air, we can exchange bottles just to keep everyone going. Whereas right now, we're using MSA equipment, they're using Scott equipment. It's like Ford and Chevy. They're both SCBAs, it's just a different manufacturer, has different fittings. But with us being different manufacturers, they've been Scott for a long time, we've been MSA for a long time, but Scott equipment is very good equipment, so we think that it would be best to make the switch. They already have their gear, so it makes sense for us to switch to what they have. Yeah. I guess, do you guys have any questions, concerns?
They can fill our tanks and we can fill their tanks.
Yes.
Is what you're saying, as well as the parts are compatible, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but you're exactly right, because the tanks are interchangeable, they have the same fitting on the end. So yeah, if, say an example would be like in 2017, when the fires were happening, Ashcroft didn't have power, but we did for a period of time. If they were in a situation where they needed to fill their tanks even, like we weren't assisting them, but they just needed a backup place to fill. Or like when our hall flooded and our generator, our compressor wouldn't work because it shorted out through the high water. We couldn't fill our tanks for a period of time, so we were really hopeful that there was no fires. And thankfully we were okay. For us in that scenario, we could have went to Kamloops because they had a fitting to make it work, but we couldn't go to Ashcroft for it. So it makes a lot of sense to be using the same equipment. Yeah.
So when you're saying with 20 minutes to refill, could you do that during a fire? Or no, or?
Yes, we have the capacity at the hall. The really big thing with that would be the capacity of how many people we have responding. If we have a large amount of people responding to the fire, and it's a fire that's going to go on for a long period of time, we most certainly can delegate somebody to take the expired tanks down to the hall. We have to fill it at the hall just based on the nature of it all. But yeah, we could do it during a fire, but that's why it's good to have that, at least a backup set, because then you can put that, this way if the tank's out of service, you're not taking the whole unit out of service, you can just throw a tank back on the person and send them off. In theory, the new tanks would take about the same amount of time to fill, they'd probably take like 35 minutes, I would estimate, to fill. So if you had somebody that was designated for that, just filling tanks, they could take a set, go, and just run back and forth. Could work.
So, our compressor can fill these old ones and the new ones.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
need to
No, we
adapt
wouldn't.
our
We
compressor.
might need a new fitting on the unit, but our compressor is capable of the PSI and total volume. Yeah, our cylinder filling station is capable of filling the new tanks. If that was your question.
Yeah,
Yeah, just to confirm.
yeah, so of the, what we have 7 in stock right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So of those 7, an idea of how many would be good until, what did you say, April 22?
Yeah, so there's the tanks and the SCBA backpacks themselves. The backpacks are basically, it's as they fail, we can't fix them or replace them.
Okay.
The tanks, we have, I'm not sure, I'd have to double check the listing. I think, because I know we have some expiring early next year, and then the rest are, I think, until the end of 2022. But I'm not sure how many for what dates, yeah.
Just a safety question, you guys have to health check every 2 tanks right now, is that gonna change with the longer tanks?
I imagine it'd be every 1 tank. With the new, just because right now, if we go, we're going 20, 25 minutes. Some people are able to get up to the 30. It really depends on what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Whether you're an airplane or not.
Yeah, and even during that period of time, we're always working in pairs. So if somebody isn't seeming all right even in their first tank, they'll say, hey, maybe you should go
Yeah.
talk to somebody. But now I feel if we're switching to a new tank, it'd be every tank. I don't think it would be every 2, but we would have to look into that. Considering the timing though, I feel it would be every 1, because I feel the magic number is around 45 minutes anyways. If you're working for 40 to 45 minutes total, you should be checking in because it's, yeah.
Now, about the masks,
Mhm.
if, will these masks that we currently have fit the new system?
No.
What about the new mask, would they fit the old system?
No. All the equipment for the old system and the new system are completely different, sadly.
Okay.
That's why we felt that the timing was good now because of the tanks expiring, because they're a pretty large expense on their own. And they have a shelf life, depending on the type, about 5 years.
Yeah.
Each tank. That's why we try and do a couple every year. This way it's not just suddenly, ooh, we need 20 tanks. But the sad thing is the masks aren't cross compatible. I would imagine for the first period of time, if we were to look at 4 units now and 4 units later, we would definitely keep the better ones of these in service, maybe all of them even, and then designate users for them. Being honest, some people are a lot more comfortable. Like the newer systems are easier to use. They really dumb down the complexity to make it simple because you're wearing basically a giant snowsuit with like sausage fingers and you're trying to do everything. So they really make a big focus on making things easier to use over time. So the people that are more comfortable with this might just have one assigned to them in the short term until new ones are looked at further on down the road. Because like myself, as much as I would love to use a new SCBA, I'm one of the people that is more comfortable with the older ones. So if somebody that wasn't as comfortable wanted that, I'd just say, well, I just keep this mask with this SCBA by me and then I use it, just for ease of use. And I know a few other members would be okay with that. Some people are also scared of new things, so.
Yeah.
So
So the total number of these machines that we have right now is 7?
we have 8, but this one isn't able to be used. So yeah, 7 in service, yes. Yeah. And we would be looking for 4 this year, or 4 as soon as possible, and then 4 subsequently in a short period of time.
So if there is a fire or, on a house or something, how many people respond?
That, it can really vary. A big component is volunteer availability. Everybody on the department is a volunteer. We currently have 15 members. And so with a membership of 15, I've been to fires where there's 2 people. I've been to fires where the whole department shows up. I find that things later in the night have higher attendance, surprisingly, because more people are home. People that work during the day, like myself, they're at home at night. If I'm at work, I might not hear a call, so I wouldn't respond. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. But that's more the nature of it. Evenings and weekends, we tend to have better attendance at fire calls. Yeah, it's, I have been to one fire call where I've been the only person. Thankfully, that wasn't a big deal. But they're usually 5+ is what we usually see. It's rare to see low numbers, but usually over 5.
But for example, if someone goes into a house that is burning,
Yes.
you do have to have a backup
Yes,
outside.
we have, if we're in a scenario like that,
Yeah.
as of current, we don't have the full training to do interior ops. We're working on exterior operations right now. Exterior operations does let us go into, say, the first room of a home or something like that, but not explore the whole place. But if, what we've done in the past is when somebody has to be in a compromising position, the rules for the rescue team are in place. So in that instance, you would need a minimum 5 people responding, because you have the 2 people acting, the 2 people waiting on rescue, and then a pump operator / command. So 5 would be the absolute minimum.
For backup?
Total.
Total.
If we were going to enter a structure for some reason, we would need a minimum 5, but even with 5, we probably still wouldn't, unless there was risk to life.
Yeah.
And unless conditions were such, just because 5 is still risky, because if something happens to because once your RIT team goes in, your rescue team, you need a rescue for the rescue. So it'd be bad to pull the person off the truck.
All of them needs.
Everybody's in the house.
Yeah, all of them need.
Don't want that. Yeah. So it would be unlikely that we would do something, I feel, short of 7. But in absolute emergency, I think 5 is the magic number.
And we haven't really had, fortunately, we haven't had that experience really here for.
Not
the
recently.
fires.
Not recently, yeah. We're lucky in that we have a pretty low call volume. The people of Cache Creek tend to be good. They behave themselves. But it's a risk that, because with us doing mutual aid as well with Ashcroft, they've had some pretty nasty fires as of late. Not in the past little bit, I'm thinking in the past couple of years. We've had a few structures this year that come to mind, but it's, thankfully we haven't had any risk to people in those. But the risk is always there, it's always present, and especially in the cold weather seems to be when we get the bad ones. It's always 2 o'clock in the morning, and -30, and somebody's house on fire. Worst calls to go to for multiple reasons, but yeah. We're getting into the time of year now where we start to see the higher call volumes, for us at least, yeah. I imagine that changes depending on where you are, but in Cache Creek we usually see more in the winter. All the little things, right?
Yeah.
Any other further questions for Damien? Thank you, Damien, for the presentation.
You're very
It's an
welcome.
eye-opener for us to actually, it's beneficial for us to actually see what we're looking at and what type of equipment is required and the ins and outs of our fire department. There's no question that we have the top end of our roster is around 25, if I remember correctly, and we're at 15, and a good number to show up at any given time is 5 is what we're shooting for. So hence the mutual aid agreement with Ashcroft, which is very beneficial for our community. We're asking our fire department to do more and more from all ends of government, municipality-wise as well as provincially. And certainly, we value the fire department in our community. And we appreciate what they do in our community, and everything that goes from fireworks to a number of other initiatives that they do. So Graffiti Days was the other one, which is a huge one for our community. So it's not lost to members of this council how much they do. And we'll be deliberating later in the meeting on your proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll get out of your hair.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Damien.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks again, Damien.
No, let's leave this on the. It's out of service, right? That's why it was brought.
Yeah.
Thanks. Motion that the minutes of the committee of the whole held on October 13th be adopted as presented.
So moved. Second.
Discussion? All in favor? And that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on October 13th be adopted as presented.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Business arising from delegations? It's later on in the agenda. Are we gonna deal with that now?
That's your call, but yeah, as you say, it's also on the next page of the agenda.
Okay, go ahead.
Can I recommend that we send a thank you for that demonstration? It's very valuable for all of us to see,
Absolutely.
as well as for our community to see via the hub. So I would think they deserve a thank you for that.
Thank you.
So
A second. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you for bringing that up. Business arising from the minutes. And we have our administrative officer status report that council received and filed.
So
Second.
You guys are funny. I'm just sitting back and watching.
Discussion?
I'm gonna bring a little sign next time.
Just one item on page 9, May 11th, 2020, the spring cleanup. That we should, just for your information, we should just hold off on that until the regional district decides what they're doing with their annual free disposal days. They're going through a process of getting rid of them, or not getting rid of them, but not having them any longer, and coming up with a different format. So if we could wait until the regional district makes a decision on their days, then we may not clash with some of the days that they have in mind.
Will that be this year or next?
2021.
Yeah. So we could just say we're not having a spring cleanup this year?
Well, we are not able to have a spring cleanup. Every time it seems like we almost get our feet under us to have something like this, we get the rug pulled out from under us. The snowfall kind of came out of nowhere. We were talking about hopefully maybe putting something together for November 1st, or for the first week of November, pardon me. Now that's a little bit up in the air. I haven't even had a chance to sit down with Shane, mostly because of his first priority right now is the snow clearing. So when I do touch base with him, we'll see what we can do, if we can do anything for this year. I don't have high hopes of being able to pull that off.
It's unfortunate because I know that there are some people in town who've been adding to the pile by their house in expectation that at some point the village is going to come along and take it away.
Which is why we're trying, just, like I said, every time we make a plan, something seems to interfere with it.
So the fall cleanup is in limbo. It may happen, it may not
Yeah.
happen.
We're trying our best to make it happen.
Yeah, I understand, but the spring cleanup, that was what I was directing my comments to.
Oh,
That, not the fall cleanup, spring 2021, the TNRD is revamping how they're gonna do their cleanup days, and maybe we should wait until they decide on what they're doing to ensure that we're not conflicting with anything they got going on.
Makes sense.
I don't think we wanna wait any longer than first week of November, because then we will be into permanent snow.
For this one, it's under spring cleanup, but it should be basically fall cleanup, correct?
Well, we don't have a
It's listed as
whole
spring cleanup because that's the way it was on the
Yeah.
agenda when it was posted in, or put in my report, so. But I'll just change that for the next, report that I put together, is just, cleanup day,
Correct.
community cleanup day.
So we may or may not have a
We're-
fall cleanup November 4th and 5th?
Exactly, we're doing our best.
Okay, it's in the,
Yeah.
Anything further? So we have a motion to adopt. Is it?
So moved.
Oh, the status report's already been moved and seconded?
I just need to vote on
Any
it.
further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
Good try.
Economic Development, Councillor Peters and Councillor Kruger.
Nothing for me?
Nope, I have no report.
Budget and Administrative Services, Councillor Peters and Councillor Kruger. Fire Department, reading apparatus.
Oh, you go.
I move that council approve the immediate purchase of 4 SCBA units with 8 air tanks and 15 masks, with the further 4 SCBA units with 8 tanks to be purchased in 2021.
Second.
Discussion?
so we're looking at, where are we? The quote is only showing for 2 of these. So we're looking at spending $49,902.28 today,
Yes.
and then an additional $43,681.03 in 2021.
Correct.
Do we have that $49,902.28 in the budget?
We didn't budget, but we should consider buying them out of legacy and then put the money back in the legacy fund later on. I think that safety for our volunteer department is paramount.
Oh, go ahead.
I was only going to comment that, the fact that we're sharing masks tells me that we need to seriously look at replacing some equipment there. That is, in fact, until the previous council meeting, I was not even aware that that was happening, and it should not be happening.
No. Is there any way that we can apply for COVID funding for part of this?
I don't see how it's pretty much a standard expense for fire departments.
Usually grants are advanced for capital items, not for operations. So I'm not sure.
just
We
gonna ask
can
about
do
gas
a bit
tax.
of research, and find out, but you know, I think it's the safety that we have to really consider here,
They might
you know.
think differently
Exactly.
though, because the masks need to be individualized. I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean, we need to protect each person on our team. We don't need
Exactly.
to put anyone at risk. So under the COVID rules, I think that's kind
May
of,
qualify.
I think
The
that
masks
makes
might,
health
the rest of it
qualify.
might not.
Yeah,
Yeah, but that would cover the masks, not
Yeah.
the cylinders and the backpacks
Any
and all
more
the other.
notes?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
The
good
problem
chunk,
is
though.
that
Yeah.
the replace the masks for the current SCBA, they won't work with the new SCBA.
Yeah,
So what the fire department is proposing is we get new SCBA with newer masks, and the older equipment that we're going to hang on to, we will make sure that those masks go to individual firefighters, that they're
Yes.
not shared.
yeah,
And bumping them up to whatever we need.
yeah.
That doesn't qualify for gas tax, does it? Because gas tax is
No.
only infrastructure.
Infrastructure, yeah, unfortunately. I've already looked into that.
Yeah.
Well, we did have some sort of a grant, what was that through? Was that through UBCM?
It was, and that program is so oversubscribed. We were not approved for funding, but neither were probably 80% of the applicants. They stuck to very, very small fire departments with very minimal budgets. Those were the ones they funded first.
And
Yeah,
they're
there
not
just wasn't
optimal.
any funding left after that. They're hoping to reinstate that grant next year, but until they get some money from the province, they can't promise that that will happen. For next year, we may be able to get some funding for the replacement equipment, but for this year, no. This would come out of our own funds.
Would we consider doing what their requested quote is, 222? Or, you know,
We're
No,
gonna
I
go
think
with
we
the
have to go with
recommendation.
four. We have to do 4 and 4, unfortunately, because of the masks. They don't fit the old tags. And my understanding is that every vehicle has to have the full gear, which is 4.
And the reason they want 4 is so they can have 2 in and 2
stand
backup.
Yeah,
And by having the tanks be the same, you couldn't
Yeah.
do a 30-minute tank and a 45-minute tank because
yeah,
then you're not on the same wavelengths, so
yeah.
I
that's
think
how
we
I
have,
would understand it. But
I think we have to consider the work safe component.
Mhm.
And this has been delayed year after year after year.
We do have to also consider if WCB would come today, they would rule that we have to change everything.
That's the work
So
safe
we do-
component.
Yeah,
Right? So, any further discussion?
So if we're getting 4 and 8, and why would we get 15 masks if the 15 masks won't
because we have
use the
15,
old ones?
because we have 15 volunteers.
But they have a
And they
cap
have
of
to.
25, right, membership?
There's,
So there's still more members that could join the fire
Yes.
department if they,
And so they don't have to share the masks
Gotcha.
because of the COVID. That's
Okay.
why they need the
well,
masks.
COVID is one thing, but they gotta be fit tested, and everybody's
Yeah.
face is different.
Yeah.
So, they gotta be fit tested, you know it's fit tested for instance, Damien, then his mask is his mask, he knows it's gonna work.
Mhm.
We're not swapping masks, COVID, leave COVID out of it, even with COVID not in the picture, it's still important that they have their own masks.
And
So-
they defeat it because otherwise they can inhale those toxic fumes.
It's part of work safe requirements, is there anything further?
You know, we have our public works that have fitted masks. I don't understand why we don't consider volunteer firefighters having fitted masks.
No,
So
I'm,
we do
I'm
have
just
to-
looking at the financial side of that. If we did 2 and the 15 masks, and then we try to find some kind of granting applications and move forward with the other additional 2 and whatever in
Yeah.
2021. So we can spread the cost out.
Yeah,
Because
that's
We're not
true.
financially flush.
or
I
we
know.
could
The
risk
recommendation is before us,
Yeah.
that's what we're discussing right now, we're either gonna be for it or against it. So let's carry on, is there anything further under the recommendation in front of us? All in favor? Carried. Opposed, Counselor Pittman, if you could document that, please.
I'd like to suggest
Financially, we
that,
just need to be.
safety trumps finances as far as I'm concerned.
I'd like to suggest that we look into any grants that we might be
I'm
able to put
looking
together.
actively. Yeah.
Something to keep in
That's-
mind too is
yeah.
Clinton right now is at risk of losing their fire department. And if they lose their fire department, they lose insurance benefits, all kinds of things, not to mention the trauma that could happen in the village. And I think if we don't support our fire department, that's
I
always
would
a
like to
possibility.
add one thing. It's, you know, not long ago, we lost the firefighter chief because we didn't have safety vests. We cannot wait until one loses its life to get the equipment. We have to act now.
We're at, you have our support to proceed,
Thank you.
thank you. Policy and bylaw review, myself and Counselor Peters. Counselor Peters,
CAO Dawson and I attended a intercommunity bylaw enforcement working group meeting on October 15th. We have another meeting tomorrow. Pretty exciting actually to see the 3 communities work so well together. The cooperation is better than I've ever seen. We have the advantage of CAO Daly of Clinton is a former bylaw officer, and so he's great, a great source of information on things that worked and didn't work when he was a bylaw officer. We have as you see from the notes, moved forward quite a bit on it. The next big step for us would be budgeting, which will happen tomorrow, which we got them to have the meeting tomorrow so that we would have the information for Wednesday for our budget meetings. The only thing that council at this point needs to approve is the ticketing system. There was 2 proposed. The committee felt that the bylaw notice adjudicating ticketing system worked better for our area because of the fact that the other system had to be hand delivered. They had to be a face-to-face delivery. They couldn't be mailed or otherwise presented, where we have, in the instance of landowners, for example, all 3 communities have a number of absentee property owners. So if there's an unsightly premise complaint, that would cost a considerable amount of money to have that hand delivered to the homeowner, whereas with the bylaw notice BNA system, it can be done by mail. So there's a huge cost savings in that. The bylaw, I'm going to use BNA, sorry, system can be, it doesn't have to go to court to be resolved, whereas the other system would incur court costs and legal costs. The BNA system can be done with adjudicators, and that would be they would have a time set for the 3 communities, so it would be a shared expense, whereas if we had to go to court, it would be a single community expense. So there's considerable savings financially in that system, as well as far as I'm concerned personally, a safety measure to it for our bylaw enforcement officer. There's easier requests, I guess, initial requests for compliance.
I'll move the recommendation that council approve bylaw notice adjudication ticketing system, also known as BNA.
Second.
Discussion. Thank you, Councilor Peters, for that. I think we are moving in the right direction, based on the number of complaints that we're starting to receive or have been receiving over our term. And it's one way of making people compliant to our bylaws. Just one question though, if I may ask. On page 20, Cache Creek and Clinton didn't feel this was a service their communities required, and I'm assuming it's the COVID-19 public education and related enforcement. And each community is able to charge back to UMBC if necessary. I just need clarification on that.
That was from the initial meetings. See what else I
Part of the reason that this, well, when this was addressed at Ashcroft Council meeting a month or so ago, it came up because of some complaints. My understanding is it came up because of some complaints from people being non-compliant with COVID-19 restrictions. And there is some funding available through the province for COVID-19 enforcement. The comments in the notes are because we have not seen, Cache Creek has not seen any any complaints, whatever, come in regarding non-compliance with COVID-19. Now, that may not mean that there are no concerns out there. We just have not heard of any, and nor has Clinton.
But we are not ruling that out, that we may have our bylaw enforcement officer able to take on that task in 2021 when we do get our bylaw enforcement officer to deal with COVID-19 related issues that the province puts on us.
Correct.
Okay, that's the only clarification.
So the purpose right now of the working group is to set the initial bylaw enforcement bylaw. So there would be a generic bylaw that would cover all 3 communities to what the bylaw enforcement officers' duties were, scale of pay, responsibilities of each community, those kinds of things. And then each community within their own bylaws would have the nitty-gritty of it. So we're not, all three of us won't have the same bylaws, but we will have a common bylaw enforcement officer bylaw.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And just to build on that, there is a mechanism in the community charter where you can have a multi-community service provided. So, and there's a process there and steps you have to follow. You have one overall bylaw, and then each individual member can have a schedule to that bylaw. One of the reasons we asked council for the recommendation tonight is so that Mr. Daly from Clinton can start working on putting together a bylaw.
Okay. And then each step of it will be brought back to council. These decisions won't be made by the committee. The recommendations will be made by the committee.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thanks.
Has there been any discussion on, I guess, who would be the one who would have them under the employee?
No, and that's part of each one of, we kind of set a generic wage, and because each community has different collective agreements,
Right.
each community is going to bring back tomorrow to our meeting what it would cost if their committee, or if their community was the one to hire the bylaw enforcement officer, and then we can kind of look at that to see which would benefit all three communities the best, and then that would be brought back to council as well.
Yeah, the general figure that we started, just to get the ball rolling, we thought that a salary of $50,000 a year to start, and each CFO was going to be asked to put together what it would cost in their community to do the personnel or the payroll for that. CFO Martini could maybe elaborate on this, but when I ran it by her, she said the difference between the three municipalities, if you're all gonna say $50,000, the difference will be negligible.
It's the benefit packages, that's what the
Yeah,
difference
but
will be,
even
and
that,
that's
it's
what,
not going to amount for anything significant
no.
on a yearly basis.
But we thought if we had it from all
Yeah.
three, then we had a firm starting point
Yeah.
that we could look at and discuss.
And the compatibility with the union.
Yeah.
So was there was funding that kind of kicked this whole thing off?
There is funding from the province for COVID-19 enforcement, but for anything else, it would be the three municipalities.
And just a note, all three municipalities with people being home with COVID have seen a marked increase in unsightly premise complaints.
And other
And other,
kind of
yeah,
good neighbor
people have
complaints.
things, good neighbor things, yes, so.
Anything further in discussion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Cannabis Regulation Framework. The council directs staff to post the community engagement report for public viewing.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Public Works and Community Facilities. Myself and Councillor Defoe.
I would like to move that council approve Norman Brazina's request to place a memorial bench for the Hoffer family in the Cache Creek Park.
Second. Discussion. All in favor? Carried. Village Services and Liaison, Councillor Defoe and Councillor Coomber.
It's up to you.
Sure. I'll move the recommendation that council approves a donation to the Christmas Hamper Fund this year in the amount of $100.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Protective Services.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I have one thing. The Health Action Wellness Coalition wanted me to ask council if they wanted to make any sort of comment on the availability of the flu shots this year. The group seems to think that public health feels that having them all at one location is no big deal, and the fact that they aren't having them in the communities this year seems to be working fine for public health. I know that I've heard the pharmacy is quite crowded, or was, when it was giving out flu shots. More crowded than it would be if they had the flu shots in each community like they used to. I guess I can understand why they don't have them in each community, and yet it's probably creating the problem that they sought to avoid.
I think in small towns it is because we don't have 20 pharmacies. We have one. Whereas in Kamloops, for instance, it would be less of an issue because there's pharmacies everywhere.
Yeah, and yet people from Cache Creek are welcome to go to pharmacies in Kamloops if they wish.
So, just for the meeting, for the minutes, the concern is that there is possibly unnecessary crowding at the pharmacy due to it being the only local location for getting shots?
Yes.
Okay.
Do we want to write a letter to Public Health expressing our concerns?
It wouldn't hurt, I don't think, but I don't think it's gonna change anything.
No.
It's almost too late
Too
for them
late,
to
yeah.
implement any changes now.
Well, we could still make our opinion known.
Well, I know
Never hurts.
the pharmacy was taking, it was set up by appointment for the drugstore in Ashcroft.
Mhm.
So, but in Kamloops, you can go anywhere, Costco, any.
Generally,
anywhere.
appointment there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the fact that the pharmacist in Ashcroft was giving shots also meant that he was taking time away from his other work, creating a backup of people waiting for their prescriptions and whatnot.
When I was in there, they did have extra staff on because of that. And the reason for the appointments was so as to minimize the crowding. And the store overall, even without the flu shots, they're posted for please no more than 10 people in the store at one time.
Mhm.
Are we seeing
There's
lineups
limiting.
then outside the store?
No,
No?
not when I was there. And I haven't heard of any either.
No one's mentioned it other than the group, that they've been having a problem.
That's the only place you can get a flu shot, is at the pharmacy.
Yeah.
Oh, and the public health office apparently, if you call them, but they are reserving their flu shots for,
I know with risk.
and children.
So, motion to write a letter.
I'll move that we write a letter.
Any further discussion? Second, any further discussion?
Sorry, I didn't see who seconded.
I did,
Okay.
Wendy, Counselor Coomer made the motion, I second. And if there's no further discussion, we'll vote. All in favor?
I can provide you with the name and address of the person to write to.
Thank you.
Protective Services, myself and Counselor Coomer. Anything further? Intergovernmental Relations, myself and Counselor Coomer.
I have nothing.
Nothing. Landfill Advisory Committee.
Apparently we have a monitoring meeting on the 30th, but I still haven't received any information about it.
That's my understanding, yep.
I got something from Chirag last week. I thought that was a meeting confirmation email, but I'll double check if to make sure you're on his emailing list.
Thank you.
Meetings when?
I can't remember off the top of my head. Councillor Cooper said the 30th, which is Thursday?
Friday.
Friday.
Remember, Halloween is on Saturday.
Full moon Saturday.
Full moon.
Information correspondence.
I move that we receive and file the attached correspondence.
I would actually like to respond to it. I guess we can receive and file it.
Do we have a seconder?
Councillor Peters?
Thank you. Discussion.
When I read it, when it first appeared, I thought, thank you to our MP for bringing it to their attention, but there were a lot of things in Minister Wilkinson's response that seemed to really gloss over our problems here. And I thought it would be a good chance just to follow up our MP's letter with something from Cache Creek, a little more relevant and a little more direct. For instance, one of the things that Minister Wilkinson recommended was talking to our cabinet ministers. Well, yeah, of course, he wrote the letter on the day after they called the election, so we didn't have any cabinet ministers by then. And those cabinet ministers that he recommended we talk to, well, we did talk to them, but they're no longer a cabinet, in the cabinet or even in the government, so as I say, I would like the opportunity to draft a letter responding to Minister Wilkinson. And, sorry.
Go ahead.
And I think we could give CAO Dawson some pointers.
So do you want to amend it to receive and file and send a letter then?
I would move that.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried.
Okay, so the initial motion was just to receive and file, then there was an amending motion to respond to Minister Wilkinson, who made the,
I moved and
I seconded.
Councillor DeVoe.
okay. And then we need another motion on the main motion as amended.
Just does the vote, right? Or do we have to actually move?
You have to move
Okay, I'll
the
move that
main
we-
motion as amended.
I move the main motion as amended.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor? Carried.
I know, seems silly, but that's what Robert's Rules of Order say.
New business? Questions from the public? Any new business? I'm sorry,
No new business.
questions from the press?
All I got is, and this is only for posterity's sake. Posterity's sake? What's the, anyway. Everybody voted for the fire department, which is a good thing, of course. But how do you circumvent the conflict of interest with 3 people on the council voting yes?
There is none.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If
that
you'd like, I
is
can
just for
respond.
clarification.
There is no conflict of interest here. Yes, some people in the room are related to some members of the fire department,
Yeah.
but there is no pecuniary interest involved, and it is an interest held in common with every other resident of the village. Therefore, there is no conflict.
Great. I thought that was a question I would get asked, so.
Motion to move into in-camera?
So moved. Second. Yeah.
All in favor? Carried.